Well, good afternoon and welcome to our second YouTube Live from the Kidney Project. I'm Elizabeth Gress, Director of Regulatory Affairs, Communications and Partnerships for the Kidney Project. And today's session features Dr. William Fissell, nephrologist and medical director of the Kidney Project, in conversation with Jenn Trunk, who is a member of our Patient Advisory Council. Jenn will be speaking with Dr. Fissell about how he came to dedicate his career to developing the implantable artificial kidney, and then they will take questions that attendees submitted focusing on the clinical aspects of the bioartificial kidney, things like who will be eligible and how the device will impact patients' day-to-day lives. We will be covering in future sessions topics like how the technology works in depth, our iHemo implanted dialysis device, and progress on the outreach and advocacy fronts. As a reminder, nothing shared here today should be considered medical advice, and you should always consult your physician or doctor for questions about your specific situation. Now I'd like to introduce Jenn Trunk. Jenn is an automation engineer from Minnesota who was diagnosed with FSGS in 2005. She received a living donor transplant from a friend in 2015 that lasted a little over a year, and she spent time on peritoneal dialysis, home hemodialysis, in-center hemodialysis, and finally nocturnal home hemodialysis, which has allowed her to return to a more active lifestyle. Jenn has been a volunteer for the National Kidney Foundation and NephCure and has participated in several clinical trials, and she's currently listed for another transplant. So Jenn, I'll have you turn your, oh yeah, you're there. Have you turn your camera on, and I'll pass things over to you, but thank you so much for joining us today, and we're so happy to have you part of our team.
Okay, hi everybody. As Elizabeth said, I'm Jenn. She kind of went through everything I was going to talk about. But I guess I'm kind of here to give a patient perspective on dialysis and transplant and all that. So you can tell by what Liz said, I've got a lot of experience in this area. I've kind of taken all the meds, done all the types of dialysis, and currently I do nocturnal home chemo. That for me has been the best solution for all the problems that I was having in regards to all the time spent in clinic. I don't have to do that anymore. My labs are great. I can get back to exercising and kind of living as normal of a life as possible while one is waiting for a second kidney transplant. I'm excited to be part of the Kidney Project. I actually stumbled across it several years ago. It might have been on Facebook or something like that, where I stumbled across the Kidney Project and I was like, this sounds like something that will help me in the future. I knew that at that time I was going to need probably more than one transplant. And so I reached out to Dr. Fissell directly. I just emailed him because his was the contact name on the website. And I was surprised when like the next day he responded to my questions that I had. So instantly I was kind of hooked. I was like, this is great. These people are communicating with us. They're letting us in to see what's happening with this project. So I kind of just kept my eye on it. And then when it became available to join the Patient Advisory Council, I signed up, I applied, and luckily I was chosen to be one of the fortunate people who were on this committee. It's great to hear everybody's story on the committee, and it's great to hear the technology. I feel like I'm so much more informed now just from the meetings that we've taken part in the last year. And that's because Dr. Fissell and Dr. Roy, you'll see his picture up there as well, have been so great about communicating about the Kidney Project, the technical details, what we're looking to do as a whole, what some of the stumbling blocks, that's not even the right word, but what are some of the difficulties we're facing in regards to the Kidney Project. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But for now, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Fissell so he can kind of give us a background on what it is that you do and how you came to start the Kidney Project.
Hi, Jenn. Thanks for the introduction. Liz, thank you for the introduction. So I'm Bill Fissell. I'm a card-carrying nephrologist. I wear a stethoscope for a living, and I'm also an engineer. My undergraduate school was in engineering. And I came to where I am now in a really unplanned way. I really didn't like college, and I dropped out of college because being miserable is a terrible way to spend all that money on tuition. And I really had no idea what I was going to do with my life until I happened to be standing near a motor vehicle collision, and I had this epiphany that I had all of this higher education, and I still didn't know the first practical thing to do for the injured person who was right in front of me. And so that led me to take a 200-hour emergency medical technician course. And in an appallingly short period of time, I was rattling around the underprivileged suburbs north of Boston in my orange and white Ford Econoline ambulance. And it was in that context that I first met patients who depended on dialysis. This was in 1987, I guess, which is appallingly close to 35 years ago. And this is a very different era. So this is before erythropoietin. So all of the patients were profoundly anemic, short of breath constantly, not just from the anemia, but also from the heart failure coming from the secondary hemochromatosis from all the blood transfusions. Dialysis was fully 20 years old by then, but there's still a lot of work to be done in understanding bone mineral metabolism. And so many of these patients had catastrophic fractures because of bone demineralization from renal osteodystrophy. I remember this one woman who every time we would pick her up to bring her from her home to the dialysis center, she had this halo, this scaffold contraption that stabilized her skull because her cervical vertebrae had disintegrated. And every time we met her, she would show us this little key that she had that we could use to unlock this scaffold if we needed to resuscitate her. And I was struck by this woman who was in pain and short of breath every moment that we were with her. And she was constantly carrying this little memento mori around with her, this little key. It says, if I die right now, use this key. And she was so personable and cheerful and friendly and engaging, despite this tsunami of symptoms that she was confronting every day, that I just said to myself, well, if she can be like this, she can be this human in the face of this disease, I, who am healthy, can do anything. And so that really started that ball rolling fully 35 years ago. And it was only probably in 1997 or 1998 when I was in training as a doctor, and I was studying for my US medical licensing exam. And I had this second sort of epiphany that the structures that I had made in a lab experiment as an undergraduate were shaped just like the structures in the kidney's filters. And that led me to wonder if we could maybe import a technology from the microelectronics industry into dialysis and make a better filter for patients. And this was really not a completely formed idea at the time, but I had the incredible good luck to meet Shuvo Roy while I was finishing up my residency in Cleveland, Ohio. And by complete coincidence, Shuvo was already a biomedical engineer working on biomedical technology and had already made a device that was almost identical to what I thought we needed. And that was the start of making this kind of pie in the sky idea of components for an implantable artificial kidney into something actually real. And that's all thanks to Shuvo Roy and his vision that he could talk to this second-year medical resident who really didn't know what he was talking about and chart a path to success. And we've been on that journey ever since. That's how I came to this, was this deep desire that we know that we can do better for patients whose kidneys have failed. And so our challenge and our mission has been to bring the benefits of a kidney transplant to every single patient whose kidneys have failed, who wants to do something different than dialysis, to overcome the scarcity problem in organ transplant. So that's my story and how I got there. Jen?
Okay, thanks for sharing that. I guess, so what happens here, a lot of you sent in questions when you registered for this event. So we're gonna try to cover as many as we can today. I know I was on the last YouTube when Shuvo was kind of going into detail about the Kidney Project. So if you haven't had a chance to cover that, that is on the YouTube channel under the Kidney Project. I would highly recommend you go back and watch that if you get a chance. Bill, if you want to turn your camera back on, I'd like to just go ahead and jump into the questions because there are so many. I guess let's talk about, first of all, what everybody wants to know. What's the current status of the project? And that's kind of a vague question, but give us your best answer.
So the status of the project is really gratifying, because starting what seems like a very long time ago, we've actually made immense progress. So when I met Shuvo, we had this I had this idea that we could maybe use silicon nanotechnology to make a filter. And really through Shuvo's ingenuity, we have now been able to routinely test this technology in experimental animals, and that we are able to implant a cartridge of silicon filters in experimental animals for very prolonged periods of time compared to dialysis filters, and able to do it without any need for systemic anticoagulants, no warfarin, no heparin. And so that device is really ready for scale up, finalization for clinical trials, and moving from the bench actually into human patients. The other side of the equation, because as we've said in our previous talks, the way kidneys work is that they filter and then they recover. They filter and then they recover. The recover side of the equation is powered by living kidney cells. And these kidney cells reabsorb filtered salt and water and concentrate waste products out of the blood into a small enough volume that you can urinate it out and not and replace that volume just by drinking. And I think we were told for many years that these cells don't really behave in an artificial environment the way they do in a healthy person. That we've been able to grow cells in dishes since the era of the polio vaccine, but they really don't express the same proteins as they do in a living person. They don't have the same shape in a dish as they do in a living person, and so on. And so we were told that it seemed like a steep hill to climb. And so we were able, really, I think, because both Shuvo and I came to this problem from outside the conventional training channels of biology, we're able to ask questions that maybe wouldn't have occurred to a conventional cell biologist or molecular biologist. These are engineer kinds of questions. Things, just very simple things like, what's the best thing to grow these cells on? Or how much fluid flow should these cells experience? And just by changing some very elementary aspects of how we grow cells, these cells are now transporting salt and water in a dish in a completely artificial environment. They are excreting toxins in a completely artificial environment. They are surviving in a completely artificial environment. Conventional wisdom, when I was in fellowship training, for example, said that you can throw a kidney cell in a dish, but in 10 days it'll be gone it'll cease to function. It may even die. And our experience, we just had a crop of cells that have been growing maybe 325, 340 days in a dish. And the only reason why they're not growing right now is because we sacrificed those cells to learn about them, to learn about why they were successful. So we've gone from being told that this dream that we have of an implantable artificial kidney to confer benefit to patients who desperately want to do something besides dialysis was really just not possible because of the cell biology. And now we've shown that it's completely possible. The next things that we have to do there is start to make the same shifts that we've made on the filter side, to move from the proof of concept kind of experiments that we've done. Hey, yeah, change this, change that, the cells will grow in a dish. They'll grow just fine, and they'll live years in a dish. And move that to a production manufacturing frame of mind where you say, okay, we've shown it once, we've shown it twice, we've shown it 5 times. We need to be able to produce cells that will always act right in the dish, that we know who they are, we know their characteristics. So these are the elementary parts of manufacturing as opposed to science. So I think we've come a very long way in a very short period of time. And what we need to do is really move from the lab to the company and to manufacturing to be able to get a reliable product into clinical testing in patients.
So I know one of the things that a lot of people were commenting on is like, what's taking so long? Everybody's very anxious. Everybody wants to know more about this. So, and based off of the meetings that we've had throughout the last year, I understand it a lot more, but can you talk to everybody else about how difficult the internal review board or the FDA approval process is for an entirely new class of device?
I can, but I also want to make sure that we have really enunciated what the challenges are. The FDA, in my experience, has been incredibly welcoming. So Jeff Shuren, the director of the Center of Devices and Radiologic Health at the FDA, and Shiva, step in if I say something wrong, really recognized 5+ years ago that dialysis technology had stagnated and that new products, truly new products, were not entering the market. And so the FDA made a pointed effort to lower the barriers for innovators to consider the regulatory process. And so these were programs like the innovations pathways and the early feasibility studies. And the FDA has been actually incredibly welcoming to us. And we're very grateful to that team at FDA that's been willing to work with us in a way that really is unprecedented in the FDA's history. The real challenges actually lie in the fundraising necessary to make not just one of these, but to make hundreds of these so that we can complete the very elementary and understandable requests from the FDA that we confirm that we can sterilize these devices, that sterilizing them doesn't harm them, that we really have truly understood and documented the biocompatibility of these devices. Because if you make the analogy to flying on a jumbo jet, and you're thinking about that engine that's whirring away at 50,000 rotations a minute just on each wing, do you want those turbine blades to be made one by one by an artisan at his bench or her bench? Or do you want these blades to be made in a factory with specified release criteria, standardized testing? Well, of course you want the latter. And so right now, we're still sort of at the artisan stage of making these filters and making these cartridges. We need to move to the manufacturing phase, and frankly, that costs money. So if you imagine a silicon factory that's making iPhones, or is making airbag sensors for cars. Any of the other thousands of little microelectronic devices that are part of our everyday lives today. We have to pay money to get one of these factories, to put aside the iPhones and the Androids and make our membranes for us. And that costs cash. And it's not scientific discovery research that the National Institutes of Health will fund. And it seems a little bit far in the future for traditional venture capitalists to invest in. And so that's where we are right now in making this transition, is fundraising to generate the amount of money that's necessary to just simply pay the bills to have a factory start making our membranes for us, rather than having them made in an academic laboratory where there might be variation in quality from one day to the next, or there might be supply problems if somebody else has a more pressing experiment and we have to take a back seat. This is the kind of thing that's the rate limiting step right now. Not so much the FDA regulations, it's that the FDA's regulations mean that we have to switch from this artisanal, academic, university, scientific bench research mode to the jet airplane manufacturing, mass production, quality assurance framework that's necessary before we contemplate putting a medical device in contact with living patients. Does that help understand what the bottlenecks are?
Yeah, I think that was a great explanation, but it also, it's important, because this is one of the things that I learned. It's important to get the right amount of funding at the right time. So if you don't get enough funding at the certain stages, it kind of sets everything back. And it seems to me like some of the things that we're running up against, and that is why it is taking longer than any of us want it to, is, like you said, cash funding. So that was one thing that I learned when we were talking before.
It is. And I just want to emphasize how grateful all of us at the Kidney Project are for the generosity of people who have been touched by kidney disease. My laboratory has been funded for periods of time entirely by the financial gifts of people who've been affected by kidney disease. I just want to underline how important those gifts are and how grateful we are that when there's an interruption in NIH funding for whatever reason, that we're able to maintain our staffs, keep progress going, maintain momentum in between grants. And that really has been dependent on and enabled by the philanthropic gifts from people and families who have been touched by kidney disease and are disappointed to learn that the technology hasn't evolved in a very long time. So I want to underscore our gratitude on that basis.
Yes, absolutely. One of the other questions, is the artificial kidney a replacement of kidney transplant or only a replacement of dialysis?
Oh, what a great question. And this first question actually almost came up when we were first meeting with the FDA, to circle back to the previous question, because we were sort of asked, well, what's the standard that you're comparing to? And the answer is really neither. We're not so arrogant to think that we're gods who are going to craft an entire kidney, in the lab. I think there's other projects out there that are trying to make kidneys, whether it be by reanimating decellularized pig kidneys or growing them from stem cells. I don't know that that's all entirely necessary. It seems like a huge hurdle to try to make an entire kidney with 35 different cell types, each one of which is in its exact right niche or it doesn't work. We really have chosen to identify the critical things that make patients who depend on dialysis vulnerable to illness, and to design a device that will attack those exact issues without becoming unduly complex, because complexity equals delay. So there's a lot of solved problems out there in nephrology. So Erythropoietin, well, that's a shot. I don't need to engineer that. That exists as a drug. That's even a generic now, and biosimilars now. Same with vitamin D, and on and on. There's a long list of things that we don't have to do. The one thing that we do have to do, that we can't possibly imagine doing without, is getting rid of waste products, getting rid of the ashes of your body's metabolic fires. And that's where the filtration and the concentration, the hemofilter and the bioreactor tubule cells, play their role. So I don't think we would ever put ourselves as being as good as a living transplant. I get queries from patients from time to time who say, how soon are you going to be done? I'm thinking about getting listed for a kidney transplant, but I don't want to do that if I can get the implantable artificial kidney. And my answer is always the same, which is that there's nothing that I'm or Shuva are going to be able to craft in a laboratory that is going to have any evidence that it can produce the benefits of a kidney transplant anytime soon. The average time to failure of a kidney transplant is something like 16 or 17 years in good centers. That's a long heritage of success that are only dreaming of being able to build for an implantable artificial kidney ourselves. So the message is that if you have the opportunity to get a kidney transplant, jump on that like a monkey on a cupcake, because it is associated with such better quality of life and better survival. The immunosuppressive drugs are scary. The worries about infections, the worries about cancers, the worries about this, they're all very real, I assure you. I don't mean to minimize them, but the data says, the data from the US USRDS, the US Renal Data System, really shows that survival with a transplant is vastly better than continuing on dialysis. Our project wants to make that benefit available to everybody, but I would never imagine advising a patient who's a good candidate for a renal transplant to choose us over a transplant. Choose the real kidney. If you can't get a real kidney, we'd like to make something for you that will keep you healthy.
I am one of those people who hopefully can benefit from that eventually. I'm a tough match. I've been doing dialysis so far this time for 5 years. The first time I did dialysis, I did it for a year. So 6 years total. I've obviously been waiting for 5 years for my second kidney. I have a PRA of 100%.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not great. It's not looking
No.
great. So I'm
And
excited about the kidney project too.
And you also, as you related, you have been told a diagnosis that is associated with recurrence after transplant.
Yeah, my FSGS did recur 2 days after my transplant. It was a blissful 2 days, don't get me wrong, but it was a devastating time after that, and I lost the kidney after 13 months of plasmapheresis treatments.
Yeah, and so my heart goes out to you for that experience, because I've known many patients who have been through that roller coaster of hope and disappointment. I think that ushers us into a question that we've also been asked, which is related to what you just asked, which is, well, who might be a candidate for an implantable artificial kidney? But before we get to that, if you're willing, can you describe the dialysis that you do now?
Yeah, sure. I do nocturnal home hemodialysis. So I have a next stage machine. I dialyze anywhere between 8 and 9 hours, 4 nights a week. That is my prescription. Everybody's different. You might have to do it 5 nights a week, maybe 6. It just all depends. I'm fortunate that I get very good clearance. And for me, it's physically made a ton of difference. Just being able to go low and slow, low blood flow rates, slow over the course of time. Like I said, my labs are fantastic. I'm not on phosphate binders. I haven't been on them since I started hemo. I do take medication for potassium, but that's just the little devil that I can't seem to fix. I love everything that has potassium in it. I love potatoes. It's like my favorite food in the whole entire world. So it's hard. But that's really it. I mean, I don't struggle too much on home dialysis. I have a care partner, my husband, but I kind of tend to do all of it myself. And I feel that that's helped me stay as healthy as possible. Kind of just making sure that I can constantly rely on myself and I'm fully aware of what's happening with me medically. So it works pretty well. The only downside, honestly, besides the fact that it's dialysis, is traveling. I still find travel to be quite burdensome. We're trying to go on vacation for spring break. I'm having a very difficult time with the airline trying to get my fluids on board the plane, but we'll work through it. We always do. We always figure out how to make it happen. But, other than that, I live a relatively normal life because by being able to dialyze overnight, it doesn't affect my daytime. I have dialyzed in center, and that was the worst experience. Physically, I just have never felt as bad as I did when I was doing in center hemodialysis. So being on nocturnal home hemo overnight has been a blessing for me, I guess I would say. I can spend time with my family, I can work, I can volunteer, I exercise, it's good.
Yeah, and so
sorry, you might hear my dogs barking.
You feed dogs. That I'm so impressed by what you're doing.
Thank you.
With the nocturnal dialysis, because it's not easy. But what it has done, I think, and you can tell me to be quiet if I'm wrong, is that this funny kind of plastic bundle of plastic fibers, in your case, has actually been able to confer health. You speak with energy. You talk about exercising.
Mm-hmm.
You talk about eating. And so the means by which this happened is that you don't have to go through the washing machine and have 2 or 3 days of salt and water intake taken out in a couple hours, because we know that that causes heart stress. You also commented that you don't take phosphorus binders. And that's because these long, slow treatments allow enough time for phosphorus to equilibrate from muscle into the blood and be removed from the dialysis machine, which it can't do during a short session. And so these are some of the very understandable day-to-day issues that patients who depend on dialysis face. And those are the exact issues that our implantable artificial kidney is designed to address. That continuous around-the-clock therapy, even if it's a small fraction of what a healthy kidney would deliver, allows slow, constant fluid removal and minimizes heart stress. And it also eliminates phosphorus so that patients can have some nutritional freedom with their diet. Because every single dialysis patient, every single patient who depends on dialysis, whether it be peritoneal or in-center, is walking this tightrope between intoxication with waste products and starvation from an incredibly regimented diet. Yes. So when you talk about home nocturnal dialysis and the benefits that it's brought you, that's exactly the specific issues that we vision our implantable artificial kidney being able to do for everyone, and no machine at the bedside.
That's the part I'm looking forward to, is the no machine part. My husband is too, I'm sure. He hates the sound of that dialysis machine. He tells me every morning how much he hates it. Okay, let's see. Oh, you kind of alluded to this a little bit, but I'm just going to go ahead and ask the question. Will there be a need to take immunosuppressive medications if someone has a bioartificial kidney?
We expect no.
Yay.
Because the molecules and the cells that are the actual kind of foot soldiers for how the body defends itself from invaders, the very cells that drove up your PRA and the very molecules that are the A of your PRA, the antibodies, they do not cross the membranes that make up the filters in the hemofilter and that make up the scaffold on which we grow the cells. So instead of having a drug-based immunosuppression, we actually have a physical barrier that separates the living cells from the patient's immune system, but also protects the patient from the cells, from, for example, getting an antibody to the cells, getting an allergic reaction to the cells, things like that. And so this brings us to the other question about who might be a candidate. Many patients are not able to be listed for a transplant because they've had a cancer or they've struggled with infection. And so the issues that immunosuppression brings up about risk for infection, risk for cancers, don't apply to the patients for whom we intend this implantable artificial kidney. So no tacro, no prednisone, no MMF, no azathioprine, and also no warfarin and no heparin. Our goal is actually that any patient who's healthy enough to undergo a surgery can receive an implantable artificial kidney. So a patient who's had a disease that attacks the kidney's filters like FSGS or IgA nephropathy or diabetes, lupus. I mean, there's this long list of diseases that attack the kidney's filters. And one of the strengths of our biohybrid approach with artificial filters and living cells is that the biology that gives rise to a lot of kidney disease, these autoimmune disaster attacks on the kidney's filters, they don't apply because we don't have those cells in our device. We don't have filter cells in our device. We have a mechanical membrane in our device. So all of these autoimmune diseases that attack kidneys filters, they don't apply to the implantable artificial kidney. What are other reasons why people might or might not think about a transplant, might or might not be listed for a transplant? Well, scarcity. You've been waiting 5 years. So what we want to have is a cell phone model. Yeah, I own a cell phone and it costs me some money. If I drop it and it breaks, I'll be disappointed. But I won't be afraid that I'll never make another phone call because I can get another one because they're mass produced. Similarly, patients who have a renal transplant are always afraid every moment of something happening to that transplant because reversion to dialysis is dreadful. We want to get rid of that whole scarcity model. Okay, you get one of our artificial kidneys, fine. Something bad happens to it, you get in a car accident, you get infected, somebody prescribes you a drug that's bad for the cells. You know, you bend funny and it clots. Who cares? Take it out, throw it in the garbage and put in another one. It's just not that big a deal. That's the model that we'd like to work to. So patients with polycystic kidney disease, yes. Patients with FSGS, yes. Patients with membranous glomerulopathy, yes. Patients with diabetes and hypertension, yes. We don't see any renal disease that would be a barrier to receiving an implantable artificial kidney, full stop. I think that there's probably patients who will do well with it, and there will be patients who have challenges with it. The same way with the dialysis access. I don't know if you have a fistula or a graft or a cannula, but everybody who's spent time in an in-center dialysis unit knows some people get one fistula once and they're good for 15 years, and everybody else in the unit is envious of them. Other people run through 6 access surgeries trying to place a fistula or a graft, and it always clots, and they end up stuck with a catheter. And there's a whole range in between. And so some patients, maybe patients who have a tendency to clot, they may have a harder time with an IAK, with an implantable artificial kidney, than somebody else whose blood clots normally. So there's going to be a range of responses to the device. But our goal is that there be no medical condition that's a contraindication. Cancer, well, we don't have to give people immunosuppression. Autoimmune diseases, all of the components of the kidney are either artificial or hidden behind a mechanical immunoisolation barrier. So that's our goal. Where would it go? Same place as a transplant kidney, attached to the femoral vessels or the iliac vessels. And if you're so fortunate as to get an offer of a transplant while you've got an implantable artificial kidney, the surgeon has the vascular conduit sitting there waiting, doesn't have to dig deep for them. That was a real worry on our part when we were starting this. When we talked to transplant surgeons, and they said, well, that'd be a favor for us. We don't have to make the vascular anastomoses. You already made them for us. They're sitting right there waiting for us. So that's the goal, is that there's nobody for whom this is a contraindication. If you couldn't get a surgery, that might be a contraindication. If your blood vessels are so calcified that you can't sew to them, that might be a contraindication. But everybody else, and don't forget, I'm sure somewhere, someone listening has had the issue about vascular health brought up to them in the context of a transplant. And they've been told, they've gotten the CAT scan of their vessels, and they've been told, you have too many vascular calcifications. You cannot be a recipient of a kidney transplant. Well, there's a fundamental difference. The moment that that kidney is taken out and is put on ice, the shot clock starts running. And depending on how long it takes the surgeon to make the connections, that kidney has longer and longer and longer ischemia time. For us, that's irrelevant. The surgeon can take as long as the surgeon needs to find the right spot to make the connection and to make the sewing. So I would imagine that we would actually be a fair amount more liberal with respect to what your blood vessel health is, what your vascular health is, than a conventional transplant would be. What else can I try to explain?
Well, once the bioartificial kidney would be implanted, what would be the equivalent kidney function that it would produce?
Excellent question. So everybody's born with about 10 times as much kidney function as you absolutely need. Conventional in-center dialysis delivers somewhere around 8 to 12% of what healthy kidney function is in terms of urea clearance. Although that's this kind of ugly seesaw, right? Up, down, all through the week. Our target is 30% of normal. We chose that because it was achievable. It wasn't shooting for a big device that'd be too big to implant, for example. But most patients who have about 30% of kidney function don't need extra help with their phosphorus or their potassium, the little devil on their shoulder, as you put it, and really are able to maintain pretty neutral volume homeostasis in terms of not getting too wet and not getting too dry at about 30. So our conclusion was, 30 is a number that seems like it's within reach in terms of a manageable package size for a device. You're not gonna be able to put a bread box in somebody's belly, but also is a level of function that I don't think any nephrologist would argue is too little to be able to get by. The survival with a GFR of 30 is actually really pretty good. Yeah, so I think that we could there's a lot of people who step on heads to get a GFR of 30. So I think that that's our goal is 30. People ask, is it going to replace one kidney? Is it going to replace both kidneys? How does that work? Most kidney transplants don't actually go in the spot where the person's original kidneys were. That's a spot that's hard to get to. We typically will implant a transplant kidney in either the right or the left bottom of the belly. And that's because the blood vessels are pretty easily accessible there. You can reach down with your hand and feel your femoral pulse. You can see how close to the surface the blood vessels are. So we don't take out one or both kidneys to make room for a transplant. And so similarly with the implantable artificial kidney, we don't think in terms of one kidney or the other kidney or both kidneys. We're conferring an amount of clearance that's about 30% of healthy. And we don't really think about it in terms of, are you placing the right kidney or the left kidney? To develop the degree of renal insufficiency that you would need support, both kidneys have to be severely damaged. Most of the kidney diseases that we see in clinic affect both kidneys equally and to the same amount. There's exceptions, there's kidney stone disease, there's this, that. But across the board, most kidney diseases affect both kidneys. Both kidneys are severely damaged. And what we're doing is we're adding on top of what the failing kidneys are able to do.
Some people are asking, will you be able to feel the device once it's implanted?
Sure, I expect so.
I mean, I felt the kidney when it was implanted.
Yeah.
It was nice and big, but.
Yeah, so kidney transplant recipients are very familiar with the doctor palpating their abdomen, feeling the kidney, listening with the stethoscope for any narrowings in the blood vessels that feed the kidney and so on. So yeah, I would expect that, I mean, if you're me, yeah, you're probably not going to feel it because I got adequate padding around that area, I assure you. Most patients, if they are careful, will probably be able to feel that it's present. I don't imagine that it's going to go inside the peritoneum because, so inside the sac that holds all of your organs in, because you don't want to go in and out of that. You don't want to, if you can help it, you don't want to open that. So we really see something that's much more like a pacemaker model, where there's, if you get a pacemaker because you got a heart problem, you get the wires put in once because it's really hard to take them back out once they're in there because they get integrated with the wall of the blood vessels. But the little gadget, the little titanium box, every time the batteries run down, you just take it out, throw it away, and you get a better one. Take it out, throw it away, get a better one. That's an outpatient procedure. These people are monkeying with your heart, and you don't even spend the night in the hospital. That's our goal as well, is that our idea for life cycle management of a device is that the connection to the blood vessel, you really get to do that once. Every patient who's experienced dialysis knows how scarce dialysis access is. But the actual device itself goes someplace that you can just open up, pull it off, throw it in the dumpster, throw it in the red bag, plug in a new one, close the flap, go about your business. That replacing it would be a relatively minor surgery, an outpatient procedure, maybe even. And that would mean that it's probably going to be close to the surface. And it also means you'll probably be able to feel it.
Do you think there would be any physical restrictions? Like, say, for example, me, I like to exercise. I like a vigorous exercise. Is this something that may have to change if I were to have a bioartificial kidney?
No.
Good.
I don't see it. I think that there may be some learning to do. This is all a little bit far in the future. When you exercise strenuously, for example, your blood sugar levels change and your blood potassium levels change because you've got all of these depolarizing cells. And so we're probably going to have to look and learn as we go. I wouldn't necessarily say that the first patient who gets one should go out and knock out 26.2 because, mile 5 might get rough. We just have to learn because the physiology of intense exercise involves changes in regional blood flow, for example, involves changes in body electrolyte composition. Many people, you may have heard about these marathon runners who collapse after the marathon with severe derangements of their blood electrolytes. So I don't envision it being a problem. I don't envision it being a physical limitation. No, I remember I had this long tug of war with a patient 20 years ago about getting a dialysis access placed because he was an ace volleyball player and he was worried about setting and spiking. And I was worried about setting and spiking.
Yeah,
Having a volleyball
I worried
slam
about it.
against his access again and again and again. But for the most part, I don't envision any problems with physical exertion and exercise and an implantable artificial kidney. We may learn that there's some kind of a outer limit to what patients can do safely in terms of their electrolytes and their fluid balance. I don't want to spend the time right now diving into a detailed technical explanation of how we envision fluid balance being managed by the implantable artificial kidney. On one end of the spectrum, there's a healthy kidney that continuously integrates input from your body's nervous system to decide how much pee to make. And on the other end of the spectrum, there's in-center dialysis where you jump on a scale. Somebody does some quick math about how much weight you've gained since last time and types it in the machine and hopes that your body can survive 3 liters of fluid removal. Yeah, right. So we're going to be somewhere down the middle there. And so I can imagine that we might have to, there's always a device and then an environment of care around the device. There's, people have these mechanical hearts, these LVADs, and they're able to do really well, but they're able to do really well because there's an environment of care that surrounds the device and monitoring and instructions. And we're going to be the same. It's not as though somebody's going to be able to sew the device into you and tap you on the back of the head and say, come back when the yellow juice stops. There's going to be ongoing monitoring. We're going to have to tailor what we do to each patient on a one-by-one basis. But the goal is that the things that make patients who depend on dialysis vulnerable to illness, and these are these big swings in fluid volume that stress hearts, and the starvation style diets that characterize in-center dialysis are out the window and gone, just like they are for you. And then from there, we can figure out the rest of the environment of care.
I think I'm going to wrap up with this question, what everybody wants to know. There's a lot of questions about timing estimates on when it will be available and how somebody can sign up. Yes, everybody wants to know. Everybody's very excited.
Yeah. So I may defer to Shuvo. So the implantable the testing of a hemofilter on human subjects, we don't have any more technical barriers. What we have are financial barriers. And the financial barriers are literally being able to pay for mass production of the filters and being able to pay for mass production of the polycarbonate housings to be able to push through to the point where we've satisfied the FDA's, again, I want to underline, very reasonable requests for safety testing. And that's a cash issue. It's not a science issue. It's not an unknowns issue. It's just a money issue. We have charted out plans for how to move from where we are into the clinic, both for the filter and for the cells. The cell work, we still have 3-4 years in front of us. There's ample prior work that we can base what we're planning to do from. We don't have a whole lot of true unknowns. There may be some unknown unknowns that we'll encounter, but the ability to create cell lines, to characterize cell lines, the ability to control signaling pathways within cells to get them to do the right thing, that's all 15-year-old know-how, whether it be CRISPR technologies or this or that. But we still have 3 or 4 or 5 years of just doing the kind of unsexy heavy lifting of implementing these innovations that other people have made into a practical, cost-effective device that will alleviate human suffering. So I think if somebody were to drop helicopter money on us tomorrow, enough to be able to convince a silicon foundry to set aside one of its lines for our work, and that's literally millions of dollars, just so we're clear, to pay for the kind of production that we need. We could be in human patients in 10 months. That's really the issue, is money. I know with global uncertainties and supply chain and this and that, maybe 10 months is optimistic. But before the pandemic, we were saying 10 months. The pandemic and chip supply issues and car makers howling for more electronic components, that may have pushed things off. But that's really a resource issue, not a science issue. And then on the cell side, that's going to be a couple more years of development, although we can imagine a world where we're going to be able to do some first patient testing in only a few years, because perfect is the enemy of good. And so, as every surgeon says, and so we can start the process of understanding these interactions, understand the impact of the cells on patients' electrolytes long before we've got the final device in our hands. So again, it's sad to say, but we're resource limited right now, really on both fronts, but especially on migrating the hemofilter from, again, the kind of artisanal ones and twos made in an academic laboratory at university to the kind of mass production, like making jumbo jets, that we need to get to be able to safely treat human patients.
Okay, so
it's money.
Money. Okay. I have one more question. We have 2 more minutes to go, so I'm gonna have to answer quickly.
I don't do that.
I know. Can the size be miniaturized from where it is now?
So I was actually just looking around my office for a dialyzer for comparisons. So this ain't too bad compared to a dialyzer that's the size of 2 Foster's cans stacked on each other. I think that the history of technology in the electronic space is one of repeated miniaturization. And so what was a mainframe computer powered by vacuum tubes in 1946 is probably only one tiny part of a chip that's a couple microns wide inside your cell phone today. So yeah, this is going to get smaller, or it's going to get more functional. One of the two, either or. I really like, again, the pacemaker model, where when the batteries run low on your pacemaker, people don't put the same pacemaker back in. They put the better pacemaker in. And so that's our view of the world as well, is that we're never going to be done. We're never going to be able to sit on our laurels and say, hey, we did it, there's no more work to do. We're always going to be able to make it better. The issues about packaging, how do we assemble this? How do we cram more stuff into a smaller space? All of that's going to be ongoing. And so, yes, can it be miniaturized smaller? Absolutely. Is that our main priority right this second? No, it's not, because that could fit.
Probably smaller than the kidney that I got from my living donor, honestly. If I remember the pictures that the surgeon took. Okay, well, I think, sorry, Liz.
Oh, no, I was just going to thank you. We're right at the hour, and this has been a really terrific and informative session. So thank you both so much for spending this time with us. And we will post the video on the YouTube page right after this, and I'll try to index it with the timestamps that that all the questions were covered, so that you can find your answers easily if you missed them. And then we will be back again live the last Monday of March. So hopefully you can join us then.
I look forward to it. Thank you, Liz. And thank you, Jen.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Okay.